on the types of opportunities that are available in open source and how it can affect an individual's career path. So we're going to start by introducing the panelists, and we're going to start on this end and work our way over. So our first panelist is Benedict.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, thanks for having us. I think I speak for everyone here to say that this is a wonderful opportunity to present here, and it's a wonderful venue to be in. So my path in open source started when I was working at the IT department of the Continental Automotive System while I was studying at the University of Applied Sciences, Darmstadt. And I did my computer science degree there. And during that time, I was introduced in the operating system classes to Unix operating systems, and also the whole philosophy behind open source and what it's like to share your code online and collaborate in this way. So I installed various Linux distributions at that time, trying them out as a student, getting curious about what it's going to be as a system. And then I found this system called FreeBSD, and I liked it very much and installed it, and it was a great experience to just play around with it. And by the time I was like in my master's, like half of the time, and I was interested in getting to know the system a little better, so I was lurking on the mailing list of the FreeBSD project, reading all about what's happening, what's the current issues they are working on. And then I answered a call for participation. Someone had put up a blog post saying, hey, we need help with this translation project. We're translating the FreeBSD documentation. And I said, okay, why not? I'm a German guy, I can translate the documentation. And then I found out that this guy was the only person actually doing the work at the moment. So I helped him out, and by doing that I submitted patches and got to know all the tools and the processes that they are using in this open source project. And through this work I became part of the project and met people at conferences, and I liked the community very much and all the people that are working on it. And that's one of the reasons why I stayed with the project. We can get into that later on in another question. And this year I was appointed to the FreeBSD Foundation Board of Directors, which made me very happy because it gives me the chance to contribute even more to the project than I already do. My professional career is parallel to this, so open source is, I cannot just say I do open source work without doing my professional work at the university, so both of them tie in together very closely. So what I did, I studied at the university, and then I got offered a job there at the computer science department. I did some project with professors and students, which I liked very much because it gave me the opportunity to bring in my open source knowledge and all of the processes that we are using in open source can be applied to academic work as well, or working in projects in general. And then I got offered a job to administer their open source based big data cluster, and that's what I'm doing at the moment. And not a day goes by when I use open source in my daily work, and I can use the knowledge that I got from the working in the open source into my professional job. And both of them are so tightly together, it's difficult to imagine living without either of those. So that's my current career path, or the path that I took into open source.
And our next panelist is Deb.
Hi everyone, I'm Deb Goodkin. I am Executive Director of the FreeBSD Foundation, and our organization was one of the sponsors of this conference. So I'm going to present my bio a little bit differently. I grew up in Southern California, United States. I did not know what I wanted to do when I went to college, and so I was looking at things from being a journalist to running my father's company, and they were all non-technical related fields. And I decided to go ahead and go into engineering because I was good at math, and I felt like I could get a job anywhere if I got an engineering degree. So I went ahead and went to the University of California, San Diego, and I got my Bachelor of Science in Computer Engineering. And that was back in the days before we grew up with computers in the home. So I think my first computer program was actually on punch cards, but that was just to experiment with that. And so we actually used fax machines at that time. I went on and got my master's degree in electrical engineering in Northern California at University of Santa Clara. And my first job out of school was with IBM. And they actually put me through the master's program, which was awesome because I was getting salary and being a student at the same time, and that was pretty good. So they treated us pretty well. I had a female manager, which was unusual at the time, but in my hiring class, there were a lot of women engineers as well as me. So it was a really fortunate time to join IBM. And I had a lot of opportunity. I was a firmware engineer, which meant that we programmed in assembly language. We were basically programming the hardware for a 14-inch hard drive. So we never even saw the drives. You could not put one on your desk. You actually had to go to a machine room where they had air conditioning and they had big, big cabinets for these storage devices. And then we actually got our first PCs with, I believe we had, and it had floppy drives. I think we had 5 megabytes of storage in it, which was, at that time, it was a lot. And I had a lot of opportunity. I decided I wanted to get into logic design, which was designing the hardware, and so I specialized in ECC, error correction code, and then opportunity to work with both young people and older people who had a lot of experience. I worked in the industry for over 20 years. I think I'm the oldest person here. Yeah, sorry. So after that, I was looking for work, and I just happened to meet the founder of the FreeBSD Foundation. He was looking for someone to run the organization, and so he hired me, and I've been with them for 10 years now. And so when I joined, I did not know anything about open source. I was not a software person, and I had one operating system class in college, and my focus was more in electrical engineering and more on the hardware. So it was a great opportunity because it was this whole new world for me, not only running a nonprofit, but to learn about open source and get involved with the community, because those are our constituents. And so where I am right now, besides running the organization and trying to get funding for everything, is we're focusing on an education initiative. And so we're trying to create some workshops and college level classes and also some middle school classes that we're currently teaching right now, and trying to expose more kids through grown-ups and as well as women to get exposed to FreeBSD and introduce them to not only the operating system, but just really high tech. So that's my story.
Our next panelist is Dan.
Hi, my name's Dan. I grew up in rural Nova Scotia on the east coast of Canada. And when I was almost a teenager, I moved to Ottawa. And it was there that I read an elementary electronics magazine, and I realized that I wanted to work with computers. But it wasn't until 23 years later, long after I'd graduated from university and moved off to New Zealand, that I started working with open source software. DSL broadband was just being rolled out, and I wanted something to protect my computer from the internet. I wanted a firewall. I told this to one of the guys I work with, and he said, here, take these CDs, take this computer, install that software on it, and you'll have a firewall. That was FreeBSD 2.2.7, something like that. And from there, I went on to create a couple of the biggest websites relating to FreeBSD and open source software. I now run 2 conferences dedicated to open source software. My current job although I was trained in software engineering, most of my job now revolves around systems administration. I work for a big company that the higher-ups probably don't know that they're using open source software, but it forms a very important part of what they do. And on a day-to-day basis, I'm working with and operating on open source software every day, and it's a lot of fun. Something that turned out, that initially was a hobby, has turned out to be my career, and I didn't plan it. It just sort of happened over the years.
The next panelist is Allan.
Hello, my name is Allan Jude, and I also grew up in kind of central Canada. And when I was a teenager, I first got access to the internet, and one of the things that I really got into was IRC, so chatting with other people from around the world on the internet, and I wanted to learn more about how it worked, and so I downloaded this software to do it myself, and realized that, well, this software doesn't run on my Windows computer. It takes some other type of operating system. And what is that, and how does that work? And so I started playing with it and learning how it worked, and I found it very intriguing, and so I kept learning about it, and then I found that, you know, people had questions and sometimes even small jobs involving that knowledge that I had built up just by playing with this open software. You know, somebody wanted to set up a web server for their website and you know, wanted some customizations to it that they didn't know how to do, and I did. And so I started consulting with little websites, and then that got bigger and bigger, and eventually, you know, by the time I went to college, I had already been working kind of on the side, building things on top of open source. And so even after college, I've basically, open source has been my whole career since I discovered it. I've never really had a regular job. I've always had something to do with open source. And during college, I met somebody that kind of became my mentor, and after a couple years out of college, he and I got together again when I came back to the college to teach a course while he was away, while his youngest child was being born, and I ended up teaching some of the courses at the college on open source software. And when he came back, the two of us spent more time together and ended up starting a company together, and we both moved on from teaching to running this company that's all based on open source software that you know, we've taken from other things and then applied our expertise to them and sell that as a service. And so I've basically been doing open source stuff since I was a teenager, and it built my entire career out of it. And you know, I found contributing to open source to be an important way of building my personal brand that I use to build my career. What I didn't really realize was what I had been missing out on, which was more the community side aspect of it. And so in 2012, I went to one of Dan's conferences and got to meet in person some of the people I had talked to on the internet, and really just absorbed the energy and excitement of having an entire group of people that were actually interested in the same things I was interested in. And I became addicted to going to conferences. And so now I've traveled to many different countries all over the world to different conferences related to computers and open source. And I've had a very great time with it and met a lot of people and got quite interested. And so 2 years ago, I started a video podcast series on YouTube where we've interviewed a developer or member of this community once a week for the last 2 years. And so there's over 100 interviews up on YouTube if you search for BSD Now. It's a little 1 hour or so podcast that we do every week where we talk to different people from the community about what they did and how they got started in it, and you know, how they keep going with it, and kind of some of the same questions we'll answer today.
Yeah, my name is Drew Lavigne, and I went back to school just after I turned 30 to change career paths. and I took a program to learn system and network administration. And when I was at the point where I was getting ready to start looking for work, and I started looking at all of the job listings, I noticed that the jobs that sounded interesting to me all wanted Unix skills. And I had taken a little bit of Unix as part of my program, but not enough to feel comfortable to be able to put that on my resume. And because I was still a poor student and didn't have any money, I did an internet search for free Unix. And the first website it took me to was FreeBSD. So I started poking about the website, seeing what it was all about, and I thought, that looks like something I could do. So I downloaded the handbook, and I downloaded the operating system and taught myself how to install it and how to work my way through it. And as I was increasing my skills, I started to increase my confidence in, yeah, I can learn how to do this, and this is something that really interests me. As part of my learning experience, I was a member of the questions mailing list, and one of the persons on the mailing list posted a call for somebody to write articles. And because I always take notes as I learn something, I thought, well, I could go through my notes and I could write a couple of articles and how-tos and how to accomplish tasks. And it turned out I was the only person that responded to that request, and it actually turned into a paid column that lasted for over 6 years, and that was with O'Reilly Publishing. My editor at O'Reilly was always after me to write a book, and at that point I was working, and I said, no, I don't have time to do a book. And when one of my jobs ended, I thought, okay, well, I'll do a book. And that turned into 3 books. So I ended up accidentally becoming a writer along the way. Working as a system administrator, I was working mostly with small ISPs at the time. And having gone through school and written a lot of technical certifications and becoming more involved with the community, the question always came up, how come there's not a certification for BSD system administrators? And after watching that conversation go by for a couple of years, I said, well, why don't we just make one? So I started a group of people that shared the same interest, and we learned how to create a certification program. And we now have 2 certifications as part of that program. I didn't start going to technical conferences till about 7 or 8 years after I had already started using FreeBSD. And when I went to my first conference, which happened, Dan's happened to be one of my second conferences, you start to meet the people that you've been working with IRC and email all those years, and then you really start to get excited about what these people are doing and what plans they have and what they want to do going forward. Since starting to go to conferences, I've been asked to present, and this gives you travel opportunities to go to places that you never thought you would ever get a chance to go to. And for my current employment, it seems that my career path has tended towards documentation, even though I thought I was going to be into system administration. When I finished my 3rd book, the book I was writing, it was on an open source project, and as I was writing how to use that software, I was finding all kinds of bugs. So I ended up being like the #1 bug creator for that software, which helped to improve the software. And the company that was paying the main developer of the software says, well, we want you, when you're done the book, come work for us. So I've been working there ever since. I was also asked by the FreeBSD Foundation to join their board of directors in 2009. And surprisingly, even though I've written about FreeBSD for 16 years, it's only in the last 2 years that I've had time to actually become an official committer for the docs for FreeBSD. So sort of a convoluted way of becoming involved in the project. We have a couple of questions to get us started, and then we can take questions as well from the audience. So to build upon what the panelists have already told us, let's take a closer look at how they got started, and more importantly, why did you stay even after your career was established? So we'll start with Benedict.
So as I said, when I got started, I was like basically using the system, and I liked it very much compared to the systems I used previously. And then I got interested and saw that there's a handbook online for the system that explained basically everything. And then there are mailing lists online where you can post questions and see what the interactions are between the members of the community, what they are currently working on. And so I was mostly passively reading what's been discussed on these lists. And then I got like years, I was only passively reading those. I didn't reply to any of those, I didn't say hi, but the thing I got from that is I saw which person was working in specific areas, like, oh, this person is working on networking, or that person is doing storage work and stuff like that. And then I had a rough view of, okay, who's working on which part of the system. And when I got later to write these chapters or translated chapters on the handbook later, when they asked me to do that, I could say, okay, this chapter is outdated, for example, so I could ask this person who's been working in that area, because probably that person is the subject matter expert, to correct these mistakes in the handbook or update the sections that are not relevant anymore. So at first it was passively reading, getting to know the community and the people in it, and then at one point you say, okay, now I want to contribute something back. I want to do something to enhance the system myself. And there are a lot of ways to do that, and I think that's very engaging, because when you're doing open source work, it's never finished. There will always be something that you can make better, or improve, or fix bugs, or work on something completely new. And I think the interaction within the community and the exchange of ideas and the nice things that you can create together is the thing that kept me within the project.
So as I said earlier, I joined it because I got offered a job to run the foundation, and so it was really more of a career path for me. And so I was very fortunate to be able to get paid to work with open source, and through my 10 years of being with the foundation, I've had to go through the process of, you know, what do I want to do next? Do I really want to stay, and why would I stay, or why would I leave? And I mean, going back to engineering, I would get paid more, and that was what I knew and felt comfortable with. But I also felt like there was so much opportunity with not only running the foundation, but with FreeBSD, and in working with FreeBSD contributors over the 10 years, because I have attended a lot of conferences. People email me every day. I'm talking to people, rarely on the phone, but because people are from around the world. But I touch so many people that are part of the project, and these people are. I always remember my boss would say, like, these are the smartest people in the world, and my boss is so incredibly smart, and it's true. But it's not just that they're smart; they're so friendly and welcoming, and these people are so passionate about what they do. And so, like this guy right here, he runs the largest FreeBSD conference in the world, and he doesn't get paid for it. He does it. He's done it for, I think, 12 plus years, and is tireless. And when you watch him, and then you watch the people that are there. Our opening session this year we call it BSD Can. I was standing in the back, and the energy, it was bouncing off the walls. People were so excited, and these people are there. I mean, some are actually getting paid, and most of them aren't, and they love being there. They love working with each other, And that's why I stay, because it's not just that community, but I see that community and how much more we can grow, and we could take that passion and we could spread it around the world, and hopefully welcome more people, and that's to our community and to our project, and that's one of our goals here is to try to get more people to join our project. And so I'm staying because I love my job and I want to recruit more people. I want to get more women involved in FreeBSD, and so that's my ultimate goal. Thank you.
I was thinking back to what I first did with open source software. The very first thing I did was install a firewall at home. The second thing I did was install on that same firewall a web server and a mailing list to run the New Zealand ADSL mailing list. That served a need because the community was just getting used to ADSL, and we needed a central area for us to talk about the problems we were having with New Zealand Telecom. Those archives are still online if you ever want to look them up. And from there, I just saw other needs. Like Drew, I kept notes of everything that I was doing, because when I wanted to tell someone, listen, I was doing this, I was having this problem, I had my notes and I could refer to them when I was describing what the problem was. I got tired of writing them on a notebook, so I started writing them on a website. And this turns out to now be called blogging. But back in '98, no one used that term. From there, I just started getting involved with more and more projects that were related to open source somehow. But I wasn't doing them because it was open source. I was doing it because it was fun. It was enjoyable. It had my interest. It helped out other people. And other people supported what I was doing because I said, yeah, that's a very good idea. Do that, make sure that gets done. And just over the years, it's turned out to be something that I very much enjoy doing. I'm good at it, and I can get paid for it at the same time. And there's so many people that go through life with a hobby that they love, but it can't produce much of an income for them, and I'm fortunate in that I can do both. A side note, this is Groff. Groff is the BSD goat. Groff is a mascot that was developed, that came about 2 years ago at a conference. It was created by the community and supplied by the community. And now Groff travels the world with whoever happens to be going to the next conference. Ottawa, where's it been? Ottawa, Tokyo, not Tokyo.
Bulgaria, and then Tokyo.
Now Sweden.
Sweden has been
Canada.
Denver, Virginia, California.
Yeah. Just whoever's going to the next conference takes Groff with them, and it's more or less a symbol of the community effort that goes into open source software. As a side note, anyway.
Yes. So for me, it was more, I went to my first conference and I got really excited about some of this stuff, and then I decided that I was definitely coming back next year, and then decided, well, why wait for next year? And so I submitted a talk about some of the interesting things I had done with open source to a conference, the European conference, which that year was in Poland. And so they accepted that and flew me to Poland to give this talk. And I really enjoyed it. And so the next year, when I went back to the Canadian conference, I decided I was going to contribute something as well. And so on the train ride, I wrote up some documentation on a new feature that FreeBSD had about computer storage, which had been something I've been working with for a while, and for years it had been something very difficult to do, and suddenly there was this new system that made it so much easier. But it was new, and there weren't many instructions on how to do it, and I had just been through all this myself for running our company. We do video streaming. We have to store a lot of video files, and so I had learned a bit about this subsystem, and so I wrote out what I've learned. And at the conference, they have these events called doc sprints, where Drew and other documentation people kind of teach you how to take the little bit of stuff you've come up with and how to contribute to the project. And Dan is doing a workshop on that tomorrow, right? Is it tomorrow? Yes, tomorrow. A workshop on how to actually contribute it. And after that, I started contributing more and more, and eventually Benedict volunteered to mentor me to become an official member of the project. And so I started out thinking that documentation was all I could do. I'm just a sysadmin. I don't know how to write computer programs. I'll just write some documentation. And as I got more and more involved, I discovered I had some of the skills required, and that with the right set of mentors, I've actually become a developer now as well, and writing actual code that gets put into the operating system, which still scares me a little bit. But so that's how I got started. Was just I decided to kind of pick a specific area where more work needed to be done, and apply myself to it, because it was something that I was interested in personally, right? How to manage huge amounts of storage, because that was somewhere where my career was getting into this area of storing lots of video. So I just focused on that and picked that area, and have over the years become kind of an expert on it, and wrote a book about it earlier this year that was just published. And but I think the main reason I stick with it is just that I get to come to these conferences and talk to people, and I just love talking about technical things, and doing that with other people that are just as excited about it as I am is really the rewarding part for me.
And myself, I stay for two reasons. One, the technology still fascinates me, so it's constantly evolving and it still catches my interest. And the other reason would be the people. So when I was started very early in FreeBSD, and it was extremely obvious to anyone that I had no clue what I was doing, I asked a question on a mailing list very tentatively, expecting to be told to RTFM or, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're doing. And someone who was a senior member of the community, because I'd known from reading in the mailing list, who'd been around for a while and who knew a lot, took the time to answer very gently and to instruct me on how to do it. So even though it was obvious I didn't know what I was doing, he took the time to make me feel welcome and to show me how to get to where I wanted to go. And I thought, wow, that this is a pretty neat community if they'll actually do that for people. And what I found over the years, especially if you're approaching the community as a woman, and as a woman that's starting to get more mature, there is no glass ceiling. You can continue to find little niches that interest you, work on that, and actually become a quasi-expert in that field. And that other people in the community respect you for what you're doing. They're just not looking at you as what you look like or how you're coming into the community. So I find that basically there's no barriers to what you want to do, and you can just work on whatever fascinates you. Our next question is, how did your involvement influence or change your career path, and were there any surprises along the way? Benedict?
So what I learned doing the open source work is pretty much very beneficial to what I do in my daily line of work. So for example, when it's system administration and I get the chance to install FreeBSD, and I know very much how the system works and how to get things working, it's so easy, like when something is not working, to ask my colleagues and friends on the FreeBSD project, hey, have you seen this error before, or is this a real bug that I'm experiencing here? So it's actually one of the things that helps me quite a bit, instead of calling a support hotline and asking them, and they open a ticket and you don't hear from them like 2 weeks. And it's from, like, when you have contact in the open source world, you get to contact the person that wrote that software in the first place most of the time, or that is maintaining that software, and you get immediate replies like, oh, look at this, or you have to use this command line switch to make it work, or your configuration file is wrong, or something like that. So for me, it's a very helpful way to get my job done, but it's also for me a very good way to introduce students into open source work, because they can use these tools and methodologies that they use in the project as well, because when they have their own projects or starting their career, they could make use of these information from the open source project, like how to manage a small team, distribute the work, or work in a globally distributed community, like over different time zones. And I think this is not also limited to academia, where I work in, but also like any sort of computer technology, business, IT work that you are going to be involved with. So the surprises for me were that, so when you're reading these mailing lists or the email communication, you and you don't have a picture of that person you're involved with, and you maybe haven't seen that person, you get to make your own picture of that person. You say, from the writing, I would say this person is like this old or has this kind of education. And then later on, when you're going to a conference and see that person in real life for the first time, for me it was like, oh my God, I thought this person was like 30 years old, but this person is like actually more like 60 or 40, and you get a complete different view from what you write and what this person is in the real life. But one thing is the same, they are as nice in the online world as in real life, so that doesn't change.
Gosh, where do I even start? So it obviously changed my career path, going from engineering to running a nonprofit. And I spent a lot of time actually looking at other open source projects and how they're run. And in the 10 years that I've been involved, we've become a leader in many ways, but we're also continuing to grow. We have so much potential. And so I'm spending a lot of time learning what other organizations do. And the one thing that about like FreeBSD or open source, since it's not a company and the bottom line isn't the important thing, it's really what the direction is taken by the contributors and the direction that they want to go. And so they, and for FreeBSD in particular, they really want a really great operating system. I mean, there's a lot of things that they want, but they're not looking at dollars, they're not looking at consumers, they're looking at just the best product that they can work on and contribute to. So for me, the surprise was, actually getting back to the influence. So my influence that I feel like has changed my career path was, like I said before, going from engineering to running a nonprofit, but also looking at, sometimes when I look at, well, what do I want to do in my free time after working 8 hours a day, I'm very into sports, and I'm an avid swimmer and cyclist and runner, and so I've always wanted to get involved with working with girls in sports. But I recognize that I spent a lot of time in my job and with this community, and the whole women and girls in STEM and tech, that's been big in the last year. A lot of news, a lot of articles on that, and how there aren't that many women coming into it. There's a lot of women who leave it once they're in it. And so I decided that I wanted to spend my extra time working with girls and women on exposing them to open source, to computers, and to our operating system in particular. So that has been a focus of mine for the last, I would say, maybe 6 months. And there's so much for us to do, and it's so much potential to offer that around the world. And I'd say that's probably one of my biggest surprises, is that I would do this, continue to do this on my off time, and that I'm spending time playing with FreeBSD and learning it, and I thought about going back to programming and being a contributor. I probably won't do it, but it's an option, it's an opportunity that I can do if I want.
I started off as a software engineer. Now I'm a systems administrator, and that all happened because of open source software. I've had no formal training in systems administration. I have no qualifications to be a system administrator, but years of experience doing it in my spare time and demonstrating via how-to articles, people have come to the point where they trust me to run their critical infrastructure. The biggest surprise along the line, I can run a conference. I had no idea I could run a conference, but then I got the idea to run one because the conference that was running in the US stopped, BSD Con, that stopped running. There was no conference. There's a guy in town who ran a Linux conference. I talked to him, took him to lunch a few times, decided if he can do it, can't be that hard. So I ran it, turned out to be a big success. Since then, I've run about 20 different conferences. Sorry, 20 conferences, some of them have been the same. And it's a lot easier than I thought it was. I don't know why, but I seem to have a natural knack for it. So that was the biggest surprise. It wasn't open source. It was just being able to run a conference. But the conference happens to center around open source topics.
As for me, the way it influenced my career was I started kind of doing open source before I got to the point of having a career, and started, basically my entire career has been open source now. But I think the biggest surprise for me was when I was teaching and a student came up to me and asked for advice ahead of a job interview that they were about to go into for the work placement between semesters in school. And that's when I came to realize that I've had many different jobs in my career, and I've actually never had a regular job interview. I've always had this body of work that I've contributed to open source that has kind of spoken for my abilities, kind of like Dan was saying. Didn't necessarily have formal qualifications, but I have this body of work that people can easily find, and it speaks for me, and I don't have to, usually jobs came to me rather than me having to go to them, because I had this reputation as, someone that was very good in this particular area, and now, with ZFS and storage, I kind of sought after for that area, whereas a couple of years ago, I wasn't an expert at it. I just decided that this was an area that I was interested in and I could focus on, and in doing so, I made myself into the expert and now I have a whole career where I could do that full time if I wanted. I'm happy running my own company instead, but if that ever were to change, I know that there are plenty of opportunities I could get just with the reputation and experience that I've built from doing open source.
Biggest surprise for me is once I got started in open source, I refused more jobs than I accepted. It's just like people are always looking for an expert in a field, and I'm at a point where I don't think I have to worry about job security. If the job I'm working at today disappeared, I know there would be 4 or 5 waiting for me, and that's something that I never dreamed going into IT would be something that would be an actual possibility.
Add to that.
Okay, Dan?
I get emails 3 or 4 times a week asking, hey, listen, we have a need for someone who has PostgreSQL experience. That's an open source database which is very big and very popular. But they can't find enough people to work with it. And I worked with it on one website about 10 or 12 years ago, and they still want me to keep, people want that experience. And I just did it on a website, something personal interest. I've never been paid to work with Postgres, but people still want to hire me because of my past experience. And that was just volunteer work no formal qualifications.
Next question, why is open source good for academic research? So we'll start with Benedict, our academic.
So open source is basically having all the sources to the programs available, whether it's an operating system kernel or some application software. And this gives you the opportunity, instead of having only a compiled binary available from some proprietary vendor, you can, in open source, you can look at all the source and how it's implemented. And this gives you the leverage of having this knowledge baked into this open source code to know how this was implemented, when it was implemented, and the reason why it was implemented. So we often have this metaphor in the open source world, like standing on the shoulders of giants. So people that wrote this code before you and made these implementations, and you can enhance that code and build on it and make your own thing, or fix the bugs that they may have had, or create something completely new from that. And this is very good also in research, because you don't have to start at zero. You can take bits and pieces from different persons and open source projects, put them together, use them for your research, and learn from what these people have brought up into their open source. And this is, I think, very beneficial for research, because it's open, it's available for everyone, and they can use it to enhance their own world.
We've got about 5 minutes left. Do we want to move to open questions?
How can, I think we've discussed that one enough. Let's go to this one. So what advice would you give to someone interested in getting involved with an open source community? And maybe we'll start with Allan.
I would just say, find an area that you have an interest in and just start learning about it and using it. And that's what I did. I just decided that I was interested in computer storage because that's where I saw my career going. And so I started researching it and then started writing and contributing documentation about it. And then I ended up writing a book about it, and now, kind of known as an expert in that area. And I basically used that for my career.
I stumbled across open source accidentally. It wasn't a conscious effort. Someone said, here, try this, because that'll meet the needs you have. It turned out to be open source, and here I am today.
I would just say to find a project that has work that you'd be interested in working on. And then, so when you sort of narrow it down, because you might have a choice of different open source projects, there's a lot out there. Then I would look at the community, and I would see which ones fit your personality, which ones are more welcoming, like what Drew said when she sent out that question, and she was timid, and the response she got, it wasn't one of these, like, that was really a stupid question that you just asked, and treating them like, we don't really want you part of our project and our community. You want to be, if you're going to volunteer your time, you want to be part of a community that welcomes you and wants to help you, wants you to be part of their community.
The interesting part is, like, everything is out there. You can just get started. You don't have to have this whole background of being this mega programmer, know everything. You can start at some point in one project or two that interests you and start from there. Answer questions on mailing lists, help out, contribute some source, look at their bug tracker, whether you can solve a problem that they might have. And this is one stepping stone that might add up to a whole different career that you might have in open source. And since everything is online, you can also go to a future employer and say, hey, look, these are the contributions I already made to open source. It's like a work record online. Everyone can look it up. And I think most people are scared of that because you might also display your weaknesses or errors that you made. But I don't think this is negative, because you also show your interaction within the community, and you also show how you present your work and how much quality and care you take for your source code or for your work in general. And I think everyone is able to see that you are involved in the project in this way and trying to improve things as they are.
So we have time for a few questions, and while we're doing questions, I'll leave the slide up that has all of our contact information if you'd like to contact any of us. And we're also going to be out front in the main hall for the rest of the day if you want to drop by and ask other questions. But are there any questions?
Thank you, panel. No, my question is not related to FreeBSD, but open source in general. Recent security vulnerabilities like Heartbleed and SSL splitting, does it has impact in the development, or what is your thought? It has impact in the development process of open source software development or development process in general?
I think things like Heartbleed have shown that it's very important to have a continuing community around a project. The problem OpenSSL had was, a vendor would pay someone to develop X feature and add it to OpenSSL, but there was no community there that took care of the housekeeping and the maintenance. And so, this new feature about doing heartbeat connections got added, and nobody noticed that there was a problem with it because there was nobody doing the maintenance. And that's why it's very important to have a whole community of people, because that's how the code review happens and that's how the maintenance happens. And I think that's something that is less likely to happen in FreeBSD because we have a large community of people that are actually interested in maintaining it.
The value of community cannot be underestimated. If you're a big multinational corporation and you're making use of open source software, it is in your business interests to make sure that the communities around the software that you are using thrive. That's why so many big companies sponsor open source software, because they want to make sure that the people that work on that software get together and improve that software and continue to maintain it. Unmaintained software winds up in the long run being detrimental. And that's why continuous community involvement helps to maintain it and keep it to a high level, as opposed to software that doesn't have a community behind it. And that was a good example.
So I have a question that may not be very popular within open source communities, but why do people in open source still use some technologies that may be a little bit old, like IRC and so on, and don't move forward to newer technologies that can be more attractive to younger people or new people to open source?
What newer technologies, for example?
Like the chats that are on GitHub, like Slack, things like that.
Tomorrow's workshop on how to contribute to open source will be centered on GitHub.
Okay, I meant the different chats that are on GitHub,
Yeah.
so not having to use IRC, which is a thing that's very local to open source.
Yeah. Some open source projects are starting to use Slack. I think that IRC remains popular because of its momentum. There are so many people in the project already using it that it's hard to get them to go to another technology. But the converse of that is it used to be mailing list centric. The FreeBSD project used to be mailing list and IRC centric. But over the past few years, they've actually started online web forums, which have become more popular than people initially thought it would be. There was some resistance from diehards saying, no, I'm not going to use this. The answer to that is, well, it's not for you, it's for the people that will use it. And all it takes is for someone to get involved in the project and say, hey, listen, I'm going to start up this Slack channel. And you start it up, and it becomes a part of the project. I can give you an example. I started a website called Fresh Reports, and when I initially suggested it, someone said, hey, no, I can do that with a mailing list and ProcMail. And my answer to that was, well, it's not for you, it's for the people that want the service that will come with this new feature. And so I went ahead and created it, and it's now a vital part of the community, and that's what anyone can do if they want. If you think that Slack would be a great benefit to the community, all you do is you start it up. That's the great beauty of open source, is if you want to do it, you do it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming to our panel.
I don't, okay. If you want to talk to us, just come up and talk to us. We're happy to answer any questions. There's a lot of topics on open source that we just can't cover in 1 hour. If you have no experience with open source and want to know more about what it is and how it works, just come and have a chat with us. We'll be out there all afternoon. Come and meet Groff.